I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It started somewhere ordinary enough that I almost forgot the first day entirely. A laundromat 2 blocks from my apartment. The kind with flickering fluorescent lights and machines that hummed like they were tired of doing the same thing every day. I usually went there Sunday mornings. Not because I liked mornings, just because fewer people were around. There's a strange kind of silence in places like that. Not real silence. Machines rattling, dryers spinning, but the kind where nobody talks to anyone. Everyone stares at their phone or pretends they're busy folding the same shirt twice. I'd sit by the window with my laundry basket and scroll through messages I never sent. Sometimes I'd type something like, "Hey, it's been a while," then delete it. It became a small habit, like checking the time, even when you already know it. The first time I noticed her, she was standing by the change machine. Mid-40s, maybe a little older. Dark hair pulled back loosely, like she hadn't planned on staying long. She wore a pale blue sweater and held a thermos in one hand. Not the kind of woman who tries to be noticed. But somehow, you notice. The machine beeped loudly, and she sighed under her breath. "Of course," she murmured. I looked up before I realized I was staring. She glanced over, caught me watching, and gave a small, embarrassed smile. "Do you know if this thing ever works?" she asked. Her voice was calm, soft. I shrugged. "Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just pretends." That made her laugh. Not loudly, just a quiet breath of a laugh. I walked over and tapped the machine twice like I'd seen someone else do before. The coins dropped. She looked at me like I performed some kind of magic. "Well," she said, "I guess you're officially my favorite person in the room." I felt awkward after that, like I should say something clever, but nothing came out. So I just nodded and stepped back. For the next 20 minutes, we didn't speak again. But I noticed things. The way she checked the washing machine every few minutes, even though it was clearly still running. The way she unscrewed the thermos lid slowly and held it between both hands before taking a sip. Once, she looked toward the window where I was sitting. Not directly at me, just in my direction. When her laundry finished, she carried the basket to the folding table next to mine. "Thanks again," she said, "for the coins." The machine whispering. I smiled a little. She folded her clothes carefully, slower than most people. At one point, she paused, staring at a gray sweater in her hands like she'd forgotten what she was doing. Then she shook her head slightly and finished folding. "Do you live around here?" she asked after a moment. "Yeah, just moved in last month." She nodded. "Me too." "Well, not just." She corrected herself. "A few months." I noticed a thin ring on her finger when she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Not a wedding ring. Something simpler. Silver. We stood there a moment longer than necessary. Then she picked up her basket. "Amira, by the way." "Ethan." She repeated it softly, like she was testing the sound. "Ethan." Then she smiled again and walked toward the door. I figured that would be it. Just one of those small, forgettable moments people have in places like laundromats. But as I was pulling my phone from my pocket, I noticed something on the folding table beside me. Her thermos. Still warm. I looked toward the door, but she was already gone. And a few seconds later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message said, "Hi, Ethan. I think I left something behind." Her thermos was still warm when I picked it up. The laundromat door had already closed behind her, the little bell above it giving one last tired jingle. I stood there for a second, holding the metal lid between my fingers like it might explain something. Then my phone buzzed again. Ethan. I think I left something behind." I looked at the thermos. "Yeah, I typed." "You did." 3 dots appeared immediately. "I'm still outside." When I stepped out, she was standing near the sidewalk, shifting her weight slightly like she wasn't sure if she should have waited. The morning air was cool, and she'd pulled her sweater sleeves over her hands. I held up the thermos. "You move fast," I said. She smiled with a quiet kind of relief. "I do that when I'm embarrassed." I handed it to her. Our fingers brushed for a second. Not the kind of moment anyone would notice. Still, she cleared her throat afterward like she had. "Thank you," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, she lifted the thermos slightly. "There, if you were wondering." I said, even though I hadn't been. She tilted her head toward the small bench outside the laundromat. "My dryer still has 10 minutes," she said. "And I made too much." I hesitated. Not because of the tea, just because moments like that, unexpected ones, usually turned into something awkward. But I sat down anyway. She poured some into the thermos lid and handed it to me. The tea smelled like mint. For a minute we didn't talk. Cars passed slowly down the street. Someone across the road unlocked their bike. "You live in the brick building on the corner?" she asked suddenly. I nodded. "Third floor." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Fourth." That surprised me. "Seriously." She nodded and looked down at the tea in her hands. "Moved there after my divorce," she said quietly. 6 months ago." She said it casually, but something in her shoulders tightened when she did. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "My daughter hates the building," she added after a second. "Says the elevator sounds like it's dying." "You have a daughter." 17. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, just because my brain needed a second to rearrange things. 17. I suddenly felt aware of how young I probably looked sitting there next to her. She noticed a shift in my expression and gave a soft smile. "Yeah," she said. "That reaction happens a lot." "No, it's just—" I didn't expect. A woman who forgets her thermos to have a nearly adult child. I exhaled. "Something like that." She looked amused, but there was a small pause afterward. Like we'd both stepped close to something we weren't naming. I stared down at the tea. My mind did that thing it sometimes does, running ahead of reality. "You live in the same building. You'll see her again. Don't make it weird." Across from me, she was watching the street, slowly turning the thermos lid between her fingers. "You seem quiet," she said. "I usually am. On purpose." "Mostly." She nodded like she understood that answer more than she let on. The laundromat dryer buzzer rang inside. Neither of us moved right away. Finally, she stood and brushed her hands on her jeans. "Well, neighbor," she said lightly. Then she did something small. As she passed me to go back inside, she rested her hand briefly on my shoulder. Not long, just a second, but it was steady. "I'm glad you were here this morning, Ethan." I watched the door close behind her again, and I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone had finally noticed I was there. After that morning, I started noticing her everywhere. Not in a dramatic way, just small overlaps. The elevator stopping on the 4th floor. The faint sound of someone watering plants on the balcony above mine. A soft knock on my door one evening. The first time she knocked, she held a small plate wrapped in foil. "I made too much pasta again," Mira said, almost apologetically. "It's becoming a pattern." I leaned against the doorframe. "Dangerous habit," I said. "Feeding your neighbors." She gave a small shrug. "Someone should benefit from my inability to cook for one." I took the plate. Our fingers didn't touch this time. I noticed that too. After that, it became routine. Sometimes we'd run into each other by the mailboxes. Sometimes on the balcony, late evening. The city quieter then. Wind pushing lightly against the railings. We didn't talk about anything serious. Her daughter's school applications. My freelance design work that paid just enough to be annoying, as I put it. Once she asked what music I listened to, and I spent 5 minutes trying to explain a band she'd never heard of. She watched me like the explanation itself was interesting, but there was always something careful about her. A step back where most people would lean forward. One night we were both on the balcony again. She had her thermos. I had a mug that had already gone cold. "You should really drink that while it's hot," she said. "I forget." "You forget a lot of things." "Like?" She tilted her head slightly. "Like how loud your music is after midnight." I laughed. "You can hear that." "I can hear everything," she said quietly. The way she said it made the space between us feel thinner. A light came on in the apartment behind her, spilling across the balcony floor. She didn't turn around. "My daughter noticed you," she added after a moment. I blinked. "What?" "She saw us talking last week. Asked who you were." My stomach did something strange. "What did you say?" She lifted the thermos, took a small sip. "I said you were my neighbor." "Which is true." "Yes." But she didn't look convinced by her own answer. We stood there a while, the metal railing cool under my hands. "You should probably keep your music lower," she said finally. "That a complaint? A suggestion? From you? From someone who doesn't want her daughter asking more questions." That landed somewhere deeper than it should have. I looked at her then. Really looked. She seemed tired. Not physically, just the kind of tired that comes from thinking too much about something. "Hey," I said quietly. She looked up. You're overthinking this. A small breath escaped her. Am I? Yeah. She studied my face like she was trying to decide something. Then she laughed softly and shook her head. You're 24, Ethan. Last time I checked. And she stopped. Just like that. The sentence hung there between us. Wind pushed a strand of hair across her face. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed it aside. The moment my fingers touched her temple, everything went still. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on mine, close enough now that I could see the tiny crease near her left eye when she squinted. My hand was still there, too close. For a second it felt like something might happen, something neither of us had planned. Her lips parted slightly. Then a voice came from inside her apartment. Mom. We both stepped back at the exact same time. The balcony door slid open behind her, and Mira didn't look at me again before she went inside. After that night on the balcony, things changed. Not in a dramatic way, just quieter. Mira stopped lingering in the hallway. When we passed near the mailboxes, she'd offer a polite smile, but her eyes didn't stay long. The conversations that used to stretch into minutes now ended in seconds. Fun. Morning. Take care. Little exits. At first I told myself it didn't matter. People get busy. People have lives. But then I noticed something else. The balcony light above mine stopped turning on at night, and I realized I'd been waiting for it. A week passed like that. Then another. One evening, I came home late with a grocery bag cutting into my fingers. As I stepped into the lobby, I heard a familiar voice near the front door. Mira. She was standing with a man I'd never seen before. Mid-40s maybe, well-dressed, confident in that quiet way people get when they know exactly where they belong. They were laughing about something. I froze halfway to the elevator. The man placed his hand lightly on her back while speaking. Not possessive, just comfortable. But Mira looked different, careful, like someone trying to remember how to be normal. She glanced toward the elevator and saw me standing there. The smile on her face faded slightly. Ethan, she said. The man turned. Oh, this is Daniel, she added quickly. An old friend. Daniel gave a polite nod. Neighbor, Mira explained to him. That word again. Neighbor. I nodded back and pressed the elevator button, even though it was already lit. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. You getting home late? She asked. Yeah. The elevator doors opened. For a second I thought she might say something else. She didn't. The doors closed between us. A few nights later, I found her sitting on the bench outside the building. The same bench where tenants sometimes waited for rides or smoked cigarettes they pretended they were quitting. She had the thermos with her. Of course she did. I almost walked past, but she looked up when she heard my steps. Ethan. Just my name. Nothing else. I stopped. You disappeared, I said before I could stop myself. The words came out quieter than I expected. She looked down at her hands. I didn't disappear. Feels like you did. A small breath left her. For a moment the streetlight above us buzzed softly. I thought maybe that would make things easier, she said. For who? For both of us. I laughed once under my breath. That assumed something was happening. She finally looked up. That's exactly the problem. The air felt colder suddenly. I sat down on the far end of the bench. Neither of us spoke for a while. Cars passed. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing music too loud. You're 24, she said again, softer this time. And you keep saying it like it's a warning label. It kind of is. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Mira, what do you think this is? She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened slightly around the thermos lid. I think, she said slowly, that I started looking forward to you being around. My chest went tight. And that scared you? Yes. Why? She turned toward me then. Closer now. Closer than we'd been since that night on the balcony. Because, she said quietly, I don't know what you want from me. Her voice wasn't angry, just honest. Too honest. The space between us felt fragile. Like one more word might push it somewhere we couldn't pull back from. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know how. I opened my mouth to answer a question. What do you want from me? But the truth was, I didn't have a clean answer. Not one that fit into the quiet space between us. I don't know, I said finally. It sounded smaller out loud than it did in my head. Mira studied my face like she was searching for something behind the words. Then she nodded once, slowly, like she'd expected that answer all along. That's what I thought. Her tone wasn't disappointed, just tired. We sat there a few seconds longer. The streetlight hummed above us. Someone's car passed slowly, headlights sliding across the pavement and disappearing again. I should go, she said, standing up with the thermos still in her hands. Yeah. She hesitated like she might say something else. Then she didn't. And just like that, she walked back into the building. A few days passed before I saw her again. Not outside, not in the hallway, just a quick glimpse through the lobby window one afternoon. She was leaving with that same man, Daniel. They weren't holding hands or anything obvious, but there was a quiet familiarity between them now, the kind that forms when people are trying something again. I stood across the street longer than necessary, pretending to check something on my phone. My brain kept trying to fill in the blanks. Old friend, that's what she'd said. But old things have a way of returning when people are lonely enough. That night, I ran into our upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, while grabbing my mail. You know Mira? She asked casually. Yeah. She's had a rough year, Mrs. Alvarez continued, lowering her voice slightly even though no one else was around. Divorce was messy. Husband left for someone younger. I didn't react, but the words settled somewhere uncomfortable in my chest. Young woman, she clarified. She told me once she never saw it coming. Mrs. Alvarez sighed and shuffled toward the stairs with her letters. I stood there holding my empty mailbox open. Something about that detail changed the shape of things in my head. Suddenly, Myra's careful distance made more sense. The way she kept stepping back. The way she looked at me, sometimes like she was measuring something she didn't trust. Later that night, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. I typed her name. Hey, are you okay? Then erased it. Tried again. I didn't mean to make things complicated. Delete. My thumbs hovered over the screen. The truth was, I didn't even know if she wanted to hear from me. Outside, the balcony above mine stayed dark again. No termos. No quiet conversations drifting down through the railing. Just wind moving through the metal bars. I thought about knocking on her door. 4th floor. Apartment 4B. 30 seconds up the stairs. I even stood up at one point. But something stopped me halfway to the hallway. Maybe pride. Maybe uncertainty. Maybe the simple fact that some things, once you push them, can't go back to being quiet again. So I sat back down. Phone still in my hand. Message box still empty. And I didn't feel heartbroken. I just felt paused. Like life had started a sentence and forgotten how to finish it. Somewhere above me, a door closed softly. But I didn't go check whose it was. A week passed before I finally saw her again. It was late. Almost midnight. I'd gone downstairs to throw out the trash. One of those small tasks people do when they can't sit still anymore. The hallway lights buzzed softly. The building felt half asleep. When the elevator doors opened, Mira was inside. For a second, neither of us moved. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. Her hair was loosely tied back, and she held her keys like she'd been standing there for a while before the elevator arrived. Hi, she said quietly. Hey. The door slid shut behind me. The elevator started upward. 2nd floor. 3rd. We stood on opposite sides like strangers sharing a ride. Then she sighed lightly. I was just coming down to knock on your door. That surprised me. Really? She nodded, still looking at the floor numbers lighting up one by one. I didn't think you'd answer if I texted. I let out a small breath. That's fair. The elevator reached the 4th floor and stopped. She didn't move. Instead, she pressed the door open button and looked at me. Come upstairs for a minute, she said. Not a request exactly, but not an order either. Just something simple. Her apartment looked the way I imagined it would. Quiet. A few plants by the window. A stack of books on the coffee table. A lamp casting soft yellow light across the kitchen counter. It smelled faintly like tea. Of course. She set the thermos on the counter and poured 2 cups without asking. We stood there for a moment, hands wrapped around warm ceramic. Neither of us drinking yet. I owe you an explanation, she said finally. You don't. Ido. She leaned back against the counter. Daniel and I, we tried again. The words landed gently, but they still landed. Tried? I asked. Her eyes flicked toward mine. Past tense. Something loosened slightly in my chest, though I wasn't proud of it. He came back a few months ago, she continued. After everything fell apart in his life. I thought maybe if we tried again, it would feel familiar. And she gave a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Familiar isn't the same as right. We both looked down at our tea. Silence stretched, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. I kept avoiding you, she said, because I needed to know whether what I was feeling was just loneliness. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup slowly. And she glanced up. It wasn't. My heart thumped harder than it should have. Mira, but that doesn't make it simple, she added quickly. I nodded. I know. Her daughter. The age gap. The strange, fragile thing forming between two people who hadn't planned it. All of it sitting quietly in the room. I don't know where this goes, she said. I don't either. Another pause. Then she laughed softly under her breath. This is probably the worst confession anyone's ever made. Not really, I said. It's pretty honest. She studied my face for a second. Does that scare you? A little. Good, she said. It scares me too. For the first time in weeks, the tension in her shoulders eased. She took a sip of her tea. Then she stepped a little closer. Not dramatic. Just one small step. Our hands brushed when we both set our cups down on the counter at the same time. This time neither of us pulled away immediately. She looked at me. Really looked. And after a long moment, she gave the smallest nod. Okay, she said quietly. The strange thing about quiet decisions is that life doesn't suddenly change the next morning. There was no dramatic shift. No moment where everything became easy. Just small adjustments. Mira and I didn't start announcing anything to the building. We didn't suddenly become a story people could point at. Instead, our routines slowly bent toward each other. The first change happened about 2 weeks later. Sunday morning, 8:47 a.m. I was downstairs at the laundromat again, sitting by the same window with my phone in my hand. The machines hummed the way they always had. I was halfway through typing a message to a client when the doorbell jingled. I didn't even look up at first, but I recognized the thermos when it appeared on the folding table beside me. Thought you might be here, Mira said. I glanced up. She was wearing that same pale blue sweater from the first day we met. You keep track of my laundry schedule now? I asked. Someone has to make sure you're not forgetting things again. I smiled slightly and moved my basket so she could sit. She poured tea into the thermos lid and slid it across the table toward me. And for the record, she added, this doesn't mean I'm waking up early every Sunday. Of course not. Just today. But the next Sunday, she showed up again anyway. Weeks passed like that. Quiet dinners sometimes. Nothing fancy. Balcony conversations when the city got calmer after dark. Her daughter eventually met me in the hallway one evening. She looked between us for a moment, then shook her head slightly. You're the loud music guy, she said. Working on that reputation, I replied. She didn't seem upset, just curious. Teenagers have a way of noticing things adults pretend are complicated. Life didn't suddenly become simple. There were still pauses sometimes. Still moments where Mira would stare at her tea a little longer than usual, like she was measuring the future carefully. And sometimes I'd catch myself wondering where all this would lead. But the difference was we didn't step back anymore. One night, we ended up sitting on the same bench outside the building where we'd had that difficult conversation months earlier. The streetlight buzzed softly overhead. Mira held her thermos between both hands. I had my usual black coffee. Funny, she said. What? This bench used to make me nervous. Why? Because I thought if we kept talking here, something would eventually happen. I looked at her, and now, she glanced toward me with that quiet half-smile I'd started recognizing. Now something did. The street was calm, cars passing slowly in the distance. I noticed her hand resting on the bench beside mine. Without thinking too much about it, I placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. No big moment. No declarations. Just warmth. After a while, she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. We stayed like that until the streetlight flickered once above us. And I realized something simple. The thing that almost scared us away from each other had turned into the reason we understood each other so well. Quietly, naturally, like it had always been heading here. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories would you like to hear next?